welcome back to Inside Med. Just to recap, the program Inside Med, helps gather medical professionals all around the world to help high schoolers and medical students interested in the field to help figure out what they want to do in the future. Tonight we have with us Dr. Doug Brugge, who is from UConn Health. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And yeah.
I started out on a path to be a biologist and to do lab research. My PhD was in biology, but I found that basic science research was too far removed from real world social impact, and also the work at a lab bench sort of socially isolated. So I eventually transitioned into public health. And the good thing is public health is a very welcoming field. They don't care. They don't care what your background is. They'll welcome in architects, for that matter, anyone pretty much. And so I found a home in public health, and I have been for the last 30 some years pursuing mostly research on environmental health. In the last 15 to 20 years, mostly about traffic pollution and cardiovascular health. And then for the last 6 years, I've been chairing this department at UConn Health, the Department of Public Health Sciences.
Well, that's really interesting to hear and is a really great story. My first question for you is, what first sparked your interest in medicine, and then how did you transition into your role as in public health?
Yeah, I never wanted to be a doctor. I'm sorry, that doesn't help you. Uh, but I ended up in medical schools because that's frequently where public health is situated. And I would say what to sort of twist your question a little bit, rather than what sparked my interest in medicine, what made me appreciate and collaborate with medical doctors is that medicine and public health are sort of two sides of the same coin. On the one side, public health is about prevention and population health, and medicine is about treatment and individual care. And so I think the two need to work together. And I think in the best instances that happens. And that's a great thing when it does happen.
Yes. And so, to clarify for those who don't know, how exactly would you define community medicine or public health medicine, and how is it, separate from other fields?
Yeah, I don't tend to say community medicine. I actually, the department I was in before I came to UConn used that term. I'm not against it. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but public health is very broad based. It's not so much an individual focus. So medicine might, until someone comes in like me and they have a respiratory infection, and
Mm-hmm.
the physician gives them some medication, takes some symptoms, and treats them and tries to help
Right.
them at least either recover or not suffer as much until they recover. Public health would be on the other end of trying to prevent the infection from starting in the first place. So it might be good hand hygiene, for example, would be something that could contribute to avoiding respiratory infections.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay,
So I know you're
good.
chair at public health at UConn. My question for you is, what are some real world problems that you're working on addressing right now? So we can get a scope or like insight into what kind of problems public health professionals address.
So you want sort of the department, not my specific area of research. Is that right?
Well, both would be very
Okay,
interesting.
let's start with the broader. Yeah, not, and I won't limit it to the department. Public health goes everywhere and anywhere, and everything from injuries, uh, elderly people falls on stairs, to motor vehicle crashes, to nutrition and diet and its effect on health, both cardiovascular outcomes as well as cancer risk. Um, my field, environmental pollution, especially air pollution, and again, its effect on respiratory, neurological, and cardiovascular outcomes. Um, Substance use is a very big topic, and this department has a very proud history of working on substance use. It's not my area, but we still have people here who are very active in that area of work. And many other infectious disease. We were just talking about respiratory disease, but there are many others, hepatitis or HIV. So public health is a very broad, general approach to uh, sort of everything that could affect health. Um, and I've mentioned a few examples to give an idea of the breadth and scope of it, but you can come up with other examples as well.
Yes. So, what's the most interesting part of that all for you, would you say?
Uh, I not to harp on it, but prevention is a great idea, but it's really hard to do. So it's always better to stop an illness before it develops than to treat
Right.
it after it develops. Okay, I mean, I
Yes.
hope that's sort of obvious, right?
Yeah.
But it's not so easy. If so, we were just talking, just so we don't get too much on my particular research. Let's take diet and nutrition. We could say everyone should eat a healthy diet, and we could try and define what that might look like. And even if we know what a healthy diet looks like, and I think there's still some questions about that, at least within the fine grained nuance of what is and isn't a healthy diet, uh, changing one's diet is not that easy. It's very hard to do. Behavior change is really hard to do. People are situated within their experience, the way they grew up, their family, their culture, the foods that are available to them and are easy to find, the limitations of their schedule
Right.
and the stresses in their lives, so they don't spend an hour cooking dinner every night. Especially in today's world, spending an hour
Right.
cooking dinner, who has time to do that, right? So, so I think uh, the potential is huge, but the challenge of realizing it is equally large. And that's, I think, what is most interesting
Yes.
about public health. Can we find ways, maybe we can't change the world dramatically, but can we move it in a positive direction and at least over time gradually reduce the burden of some diseases?
Yes. I agree with that too. So,
Good.
now going back a little bit, how would you
Yeah.
say after the 2020 pandemic, the field of public health has changed?
Oh, that's a really important question and a very deep and difficult and a little bit controversial. But I'm fine talking about it. I think public health lost some credibility. There was a huge opportunity to gain credibility, and instead, at the end of the day, uh, more people were questioning of public health expertise than before. And I think that's very sad. It's unfortunate. I think some of it is due to the broader political framework and that was going on. But I also think that my field, that public health, especially people higher up than me, made some mistakes. And primary among them, from my perspective, was uh, saying, we're the experts, listen to what we're saying, do what we tell you, and don't question it. I think that rubs people the wrong way. And let me point out, this I have a connection to this. Most of my research has been engagement with community partners. And what I have found is that when you engage people, when you bring them in, you talk to them, you talk them through their opinions and ideas, you explain things in more depth to them, you respect, it's really important, respect the common wisdom and intelligence that they have, that you have a much better outcome than if you just lecture them and chastise them if they disagree with you. And so I am a big fan of opening the door to communication and engaging with people, even if they disagree with you, even if they're saying something that I know is untrue. I would rather engage them in discussion than just hit them over the head and say, "Oh, how can you say that?" Right?
Right.
So that's where I'm coming from. It's my perspective on part of why I think the outcome was not as good as it could have been.
So, as you've been working, in the field of public health over time, what has surprised you the most?
What has surprised me the most? Oh, that's a good question. I'm not I'm old enough. I'm not surprised by very much anymore. Um,
Well, like, what would not many people know about the field of public health that, you might not have noticed first?
well, I think that I think it's broader than just public health,
Mm-hmm.
but most of the public, most policymakers, in my opinion, do not have a good grasp on how research evidence is generated, what evidence means, and how to interpret it and translate it into policy and practice. There are, again, and just in my opinion, there are serious misconceptions about research, and that this is a little bit oversimplified, but many people seem to imagine that someone does some research, they get a result, and that's the end of it. Now we know the truth, we know the facts. But, and that sometimes happens. Watson and Crick with the DNA structure. There
Mm-hmm.
are, Einstein with general relativity. There are some rare examples where that happens, and they're very dramatic and high profile. But most research is very plodding, very slow. The results incrementally add to a body of knowledge, and then as that continues on, if the evidence continues in the same direction, we get more and more confident that we know what we're talking
Right.
about. But it's very incremental, and the media doesn't help. They love to promote new study, big discovery. Discovery. I don't even like that word. Like, it may be a very important finding. It may be something that is really fascinating and interesting. But is it truly a discovery? Did it change our understanding? Did it move us from not knowing to knowing? Probably not. 99.9% of the time, It's not that consequential. So, so I think that's the thing that too many people don't understand about science and research and evidence in general, but it applies to public health as much as it applies anywhere else. And it applies especially to public health because a lot of the research is epidemiology, and there's always a lot of caveats with epidemiology. We've never controlled for everything. So, so more so than some chemistry experiment where you've controlled for everything, or some animal
Yep.
study where you. So that there should be more of an appreciation of uncertainty and and what do you do? How do you make decisions when you're 80% sure of something rather than 100% sure?
Right. Yes. So, our next question. Inside Med is a show geared towards students interested in healthcare or medicine. Coming from you, what would you say would make students, what makes public health different and more special and more interesting towards students than traditional medicine? Why might they want to go in your route compared to the traditional one?
Yeah, I'm not going to urge pre-meds to go my route, to give up medicine. What I would urge pre-meds is to look at the possibility of being a public health aware physician. So not narrowly focused on treatment and clinical care, but also having a perspective and appreciation of population health and prevention. One way to do that is to get an MD combined with an MPH, a Master's of Public Health. But it's something that I very much like about UConn Health. All of the medical students going through UConn Health get a certificate in population health. So all of them get more public health training than uh, than most medical students across the country. And before I came to UConn, I used to think, could we get all MDs to get an MPH? And I realized that's unrealistic. We're going to get 5 or 10% of them. But to get all of them to get a certificate and have greater public health awareness, that seems viable to me. And we're doing it here. and it's good. It's fine. I'm sure there are some issues, but I think there's a lot of value in that. And even if the physician goes off and becomes a surgeon and public health is a little bit distant, at least in the back of their mind, if something crops up that has a public health relevance,
Right.
maybe it will occur to them in a way that it wouldn't otherwise.
Okay.
And certainly, family medicine, primary care docs, nurse practitioners, all of them should have a greater appreciation of public health and the broader social context of why people are coming to them with the problems they have, in my opinion.
Yes. So for these students, who you're,
Yeah.
how what advice would you give them, if they're interested in medicine or public health, but they don't know where to start? What advice would you say to help them?
Well, the first thing, if they're going into medicine, they need to get through the pre-med curriculum. And I took that curriculum. I was going on to do a PhD in biology, but my classes were stuffed full of pre-med students. So I was in that. And I, to this day, that was, 40 years ago, but to this day, there's no route to medical school without going through
Right.
those courses. So you got to do that. And some of those courses are designed to weed out students who are not as strong in science. And I'm not sure whether that's a totally good idea or not. It is important that physicians have a grounding in biology and chemistry. I think that's true, but whether you have to have been an A+ student in organic chemistry to do that, I don't know. But so that's the first thing. But
Right.
that doesn't mean you can't take some other courses. We have undergraduate public health courses at UConn, and many other undergraduate universities do as well now. The public health is very popular at the undergraduate level. It aligns with a lot of, I think, idealistic thinking about wanting to do something to make a difference in the world at a
Yes.
broader level. So I don't think there's any um, contradiction between taking the pre-med courses on one track, but taking some public health relevant courses at the same time.
Right. Yes. So for these young people, how do
Yeah,
you think they play a role in improving the field of public health and making it better?
absolutely. We always need new people coming in. We need young people. So young people uh, in every field, I think, are critical. They bring energy, they bring fresh ideas, they bring enthusiasm, idealism, which I just mentioned. And without that, we would just get stagnant and stale and old and decay. That absolutely needed an infusion of young people. And in my own work, especially in my research, I have repeatedly and many times over my career had students, and continue to this day have students at all different levels, from high school to college to master's level to PhD students to MD students, and involve them in our research, involve them in our publications, and that's been a really positive thing. I think it's a great thing to do. I think it adds value to the work we're doing, both because it helps those students, but also they bring something that wouldn't be there without them. So yeah, absolutely.
And for my final question, would you be able to elaborate on the work you're doing right now for public health?
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, it was almost 20 years ago, started working with local communities in the Boston area around air pollution from highways affecting people who live near the highways. And we did a number of studies. We've published a bunch of papers, uh, and we've contributed to evidence that air pollution is hazardous to people's health. But we moved fairly rapidly into thinking about how to protect them. And I think that's consistent with public health. It's also consistent with community engagement. Communities are generally not interested in being studied forever and nothing done about the problem that you're studying. That,
Right.
you know, turns them off pretty quickly. And one of the things that we've studied the most is putting air purifiers in the homes, these air filters that filter out the air pollution. And we, just published a major paper, the first and primary outcome of our largest clinical trial of air purifiers, in which we showed with a lot of confidence, and people can go and look at the paper and figure out why, but showed with a lot of confidence that the air purifiers had a beneficial effect on blood pressure, at least for people who had elevated blood pressure when they entered the study. So it's taken a long time to get there, to accumulate that evidence. We did a bunch of pilot and smaller studies, and then we did this full trial. That took years and years, but we finally published that result. And I think together with other results already in the literature and more that I know are in the pipeline to come out, we're contributing to knowledge that air purifiers can have a benefit on cardiovascular risk.
Yeah. Would you say you work with environmental researchers for that, or is it just mainly like a public health thing?
We have a very diverse, multidisciplinary
Okay.
team, and we have social scientists, we have environmental scientists, we have biostatisticians and epidemiologists, public health people, we have students, we have community partners, we have people we hired from the community who are the field staff. So it's very, very diverse collaboration of folks.
So yeah, so people from so many different routes can go into public health.
I think that's one of the beauties of public health. You can be almost anything and be public health. You can be a public health pharmacist. You could be a public health engineer. You could be whatever. Public health is more, let's end on this. Public health is more of a way of looking at and thinking about the world than it is a discrete profession with a discrete set of skill to it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us for our final episode, well, our fourth episode of Inside Med. Good night, and we'll see you next time.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome.